All right, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. I am joined today by esteemed economist for the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, as well as the founder of the Libertarian Party, formerly known as the Liberal Democrats, and a far more knowledgeable person about economics than me, which is fun for me because after all day teaching, I finally get to ask questions to someone who knows more than me and whose answers might actually be insightful, rather than, I must confess, my students. So welcome to the show, John. We're happy to have you. How are you?
G'day, Pietro. Another beautiful day in paradise up here.
Yeah, well, with that flag in the background, I'm sure every day, at least in your little haven, is pretty nice. I thought, well, this is great. What an awesome opportunity to have someone who is so knowledgeable on the topic to talk about economics right under the federal election, when so many lies are being told around what's happening with money, and cost of living is at the forefront of every issue, and the vast majority of the conversation is around cost of living, and yet it doesn't seem like the majors really know, and lots of the minors, to be honest, know much about what is happening in people's lives and how to fix it. So the first thing I wanted to ask was in regard to the main thing that they're both talking about, both Liberal and Labor, is their tax cuts. Now, we hear tax cuts, and as libertarians, we assume, great, they're finally doing something that we've been talking about forever. But in reality, what are these tax cuts actually like?
Well, I'm going to do a disgracefully political thing and answer the question I want you to have asked instead. I'll come back to that in a second, I promise. But just when you say the cost of living crisis, I wanted to give a little riff on that first, if I can, because I think that's been interpreted through because of the way Labor is now selling it. Cost of living is basically now seen as when the government doesn't give you a subsidy. And then other people are looking at it and interpreting it through the lens of inflation, and that makes some sense. But I think what's happening is when people say cost of living crisis, I think what they're noticing in their life is they're getting squeezed and they can afford less stuff. So fundamentally, the reason for that is we've basically had a recession for the last 2 years, a per capita recession. Look, if you're looking at incomes per person, I mean, often the government and the media will just talk about total GDP, but total GDP is basically only relevant when you're talking about two countries going to war, which one has more resources, which is great. We need to keep those statistics around. If you care about the well-being of your people, obviously it's GDP per person that matters. And that's been going backwards for the better part of 2 years. And I think that's fundamentally the reason why people are really feeling the sting at the moment. And yet no one's really talking about that issue, because at its core, that just comes down to, and I know this sounds pointy-headed and typical economists saying this again, but it's productivity. Three issues: productivity, productivity, and productivity. And politicians say that word sometimes, but no one's doing anything to seriously address it, which allows me to circle back to your question, because if you're going to be serious about productivity, both major parties, they dress up all of their policies and pretend they're about productivity, but it is the technical economic term for what they're doing there is bullshit. That is not productivity reform to spend more money on whatever your favorite pet project is. If you want to kickstart productivity, and we have to, it has to be tax cuts, deregulation, and cheaper energy. And we're not really seeing that. So anyway, let's bring that back to what they're talking about on tax, because both parties are at least saying the word tax cut, much like they say the word productivity and they say the word reform. I mean, I guess they've learned how to say the words, but the offering is it's pretty slim pickings. Now, what I've found remarkable about this campaign, I don't know if you're on the same page as me with this, but Labor came out with a small income tax cut. And I know the narrative on Sky After Dark is, oh, it's so small. Yes, it's small, but at least it's a tax cut. It's a small step in the right direction. And when I see a politician...
How much are we talking small?
Well, the bottom tax rate is... everyone's talking about how much it is per day, which is a ridiculous way to talk about it. But it's the bottom tax rate in this country is 16%. So for all income you earn between about 18,000 and 45,000, then you pay 16 cents on the dollar. Labor's proposing to cut that bottom tax rate from 16% down to 14%. Now, the ATA, the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, we'd put out a series of tax ideas, one or two a week for the last 6 or 7 weeks. And one of our ideas was to take that bottom tax rate and incrementally cut it, although our target was cutting it to 0 instead of taking it down to 14. But it's a small step in the right direction is at least a step in the right direction. And to be honest, and maybe this is just an issue of where I set my expectations, I was pleasantly surprised. I expected Labor to do worse. I expected them to take a step in the wrong direction. For them to take a half shuffle in the right direction, it's like, okay, good. All right, step in the right direction. I'm constantly disappointed by all politicians, but I'm not going to take a half step in my direction and start complaining. So yes, lock that in. And then the Liberals came out and said, the tax cut is so small, so we will repeal it. Make it make sense. I mean, yes, the tax cut is small, so give a bigger one. But the Liberal response was, well, the tax cut was small, so we will take it away. So the Liberals are going to this election with a policy of, so Labor's tax cut from 16 to 14, we're not experiencing it yet. It hasn't kicked in for us, but they have legislated it. The legislation is passed. So 14 is locked in as the long-term lower tax rate. The Liberals are going to this election with a policy of raising that from 14 back up to 16, which is just, I thought, mind-boggling. I mean, they're supposed to be the party. They always say they're the party of lower taxes, and we know they're normally talking out the side of their mouth when they say it. But for them to actually allow Labor to go to this election, and when Labor says they are the party of lower income tax this election, that's true. I don't know how the Liberals have decided to go down this path. So anyway, we've got this small tax cut from the Labor Party, small step in the right direction. I wish it was more, but good. Let's take the small steps. And then Labor's actually come out with another tax policy, which is another step in the right direction. I wish it was bigger, but again, there's standardized deductions, which gets a bit, wanky and boffiny, but everyone knows when you fill in your tax return, I don't know if everyone knows that. If you do your own tax return and you take the time, you'll see there's 1,001 questions that you could potentially answer to try and get deductions. And then you try to follow all the rules and the laws and work out what you can and can't do. If you're doing it properly, it's an administrative nightmare. And they're saying, I tell you what, there's a bunch of work-related expenses, WRE, work-related expenses that you can deduct. And instead of doing all the paperwork, just take $1,000 deduction. So a standardized deduction, it's called. The idea's been around since forever. Lots of other countries have it. We should have it. I'd suggested before a $3,000 standardized deduction. Labor did $1,000. Again, I wish they'd done more, but it's a step in the right direction. 1,000 is better than 0. So there's two underwhelming, but at least small tax policies in the right direction. The Liberals have responded with saying they're going to increase income taxes, which again, I don't understand that one. And then they've said, oh, well, we'll give you a fuel tax cut. Great. I said before, one of the things we need is cheaper energy. And, one form of energy is petrol. So that would be a good policy, but only for 1 year. That's not a tax cut. That's not a tax reform, right? I mean, that's clearly just an election sweetener. They vote for us now and we'll give you this little sweetener and then we'll take it away again. I did quite like the way that was explained by some sharp wit online saying Liberal Party promises to double your fuel excise in 12 months' time. Because that would be the lived experience. They're just doubling it in 12 months. So I guess cutting fuel tax is better than not doing it, but I wish they actually just cut it instead of playing this stupid game. And then saving the worst for last, the Liberals came out with an idea of basically a reheated LMITO. So, weird acronym. It was called the Low and Middle Income Tax Offset. All of this stuff gets a bit boffiny, but it's the way they pitch it is $1,200, $1,200 back in your pocket come tax return time. And if you're not following tax policy closely, I guess we could cheer for this. Well, firstly, I note that it's only for a year. So, again, it only kicks in 15 months' time. So, the Liberals always complaining that Labor's policy kicks in 15 months, this one in 15 months. But put that aside, I forgive both of those. Because the bigger issue is the Liberals I'm a tax cutting person. I want to cut nearly all taxes in all situations, get them as close to 0 as you can. And then once you're there, then get them to 0. So I am not coming at this as some wishy-washy social democrat perspective. But the Liberals have almost managed to find nearly the only tax cut in existence that might actually decrease productivity. Let me explain that for a second, because that'll sound... That's a big claim, right? That's a crazy sounding claim. So let me unpack it. normies, if I may be so rude as to refer to people like that, when they're looking at tax policy, the question they ask is, how much money's in my pocket? A perfectly reasonable question to ask. If you're going in to vote, you care about what's in your pocket. For your family budget, that's what matters. Great. From the economic perspective, what matters is how taxes change your incentives. Like, one of the problems with tax is they warp incentives to change people's behavior into less productive behavior. Less, utility maximizing in the jargon, but welfare enhancing behavior. And that's one of the reasons why, especially small taxes, I hesitate to say it because I don't want the government to introduce small taxes, but small taxes tend to only create small distortions. But as the tax rates go up, the distortions grow exponentially, right? So as those tax rates get higher and higher, they really start screwing up our economy. And so what you want to do with tax reform is you want to decrease those distortions, especially those big income taxes that we have there. We've got effective marginal tax rates of 80, 90, over 100% for some people, but for many people over 50% anyway. And those distortions encourage people to take behaviors that are long-term bad for them and bad for the economy writ large. They just decrease productivity. We introduced this discussion by me ranting about productivity, which people who've heard me before, they'll be sick of me saying it, but I'm saying it because it's true. These taxes explicitly hold back your productivity because of that incentive. So a long way of saying, when we're looking at tax reform, we need to see, how does it change incentives? How does it change incentives? And what the Liberal Party policy does is it improves the incentives for people earning between 37 and 45,000. Great. Love it. Not complaining about that bit. Do it. Cut tax on people earning 37 to 48. But then they don't just leave it there, right? The way they have framed their policy is they are increasing the marginal tax rate, for people earning between $104,000 and $144,000 a year. Now, I'm not saying you're going to end up paying more, like you might end up with money in your pocket, but for people on between 104 and 144, your incentives got worse. They have now incentivized worse behavior. And the kicker to all this is, we've got good data on this. People earning between $30,000 and $40,000 a year don't really change their behavior much. The distortion is fairly small. But people earning over 100,000, they do. They can hire tax accountants. They can hide a bit of money. They can change their decisions a bit easier, right? They've got more flexibility. They can shift some of their income offshore. They have the option. Some of these people are small business owners. They can decide whether to buy that next piece of capital, whether to put on that next employee, right? So they have flexibility, and the decisions they make really matter. These are the exact people that we need to be cutting marginal tax rates for, right? If we cared about productivity, they need a tax cut. The Liberal Party policy pretends it's a tax cut and then increases their marginal tax rates by 3%, which is just mind-bogglingly dumb if your goal is productivity. It's probably good if your goal is getting re-elected by putting out some easy sugar hit, and it probably polled well in opinion polls and focus groups. I guess that's why they did it. But it is not tax reform. It's a terrible idea. It's very frustrating that that's the way they went, which just leaves, at the end of this, long story short, Labor is actually going to this election with a better income tax policy than the Liberals. And I don't want to say that, by the way. I understand this. For people who are diehard Liberals listening to this, they go, a Labor shill. I'm not a Labor shill. I'd love to be ripping on Labor. I don't want Labor to win, right? They've got worse energy policies. They're worse in lots of other ways. I don't want to say this sentence. The problem is, it's true. The Liberals have a worse income tax policy going into this election. I wish it wasn't true. I wish they'd change it. I wish they'd have listened to the many good ideas coming out of the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. But, c'est la vie. This is where we're at.
It is insane to think that the Liberals, like, they exist based on this legacy memory of them that they are like the economic better managers, and that they're going to be the ones to yes, not only not give us a tax cut, but not increase the productivity of the people most likely to increase what they do. I've heard it said before that like taxes are essentially a fine on working, a fine on productivity. So that's insane to think that that's the area that they're not going to focus on. It brings me.
If I can just riff on that for a second, because it's
sure.
in one context, the economists, the normie economists, the ones you meet in your undergraduate degree, will tell you, oh yes, we tax smoking and drinking and gambling because we want less of that. So, you get less of the things you tax, and we subsidize the thing you want more of, like education, all right? And that's the way they justify those policies. The biggest tax by far we have in Australia is a tax on productivity, and the biggest subsidy we have in Australia is a subsidy for lack of productivity. And we just sort of gloss over those because, we're doing them for a different reason. Yeah, I understand. You're doing them for a different reason. Doesn't change the incentives you're creating. So that's going to your point.
Well, and aside from we do it for a different reason, most people, I think, in my experience, and this is anecdotal, but most people have come to accept those two simple facts, that we subsidize non-work and we fine work, simply because of the fact that, that's just taxes. They just exist. The death taxes and whatever your third option is are just the certainties in life, and we can't change that. We can't touch those. And even welfare's become this untouchable beast in certainly recent times, but also for a while. My question was going to be, though, given that the Liberal Party has this history of being supposedly the better economic managers, you have said already a couple of times, I have no idea why they're doing this. Could you speculate as to why they could possibly be, choosing to be so willfully ignorant? Because we think of the Liberals as they know these things. Like, they know that tax cuts are supposed to be better for, the general population and for productive people and for small business and all the rest of it. Why is it then that they're completely ignoring this? Is it as simple as win the election?
Yeah, don't overestimate what they know. I mean, the way they talk about tax cuts is nearly always framed as money in your pocket. And I get that. That's part of the conversation. But there is a total lack of conversation about the link between tax and productivity. I mean, when the Liberals were in power for 9 years, so they controlled Treasury, they put together their stage 3 tax cuts, which is basically the only good thing that either side of politics has done for 20 years. And then they allowed Treasury to non-model it and put out a version of it where they just assumed there would be zero productivity gain. I mean, that's built in to the modeling. And it's not that the modeling showed zero. That was one of the inputs of their model. Oh, I will assume zero benefit from the tax cut. They assumed it out at the end, and walked around saying the tax cuts give you absolutely nothing but blow a huge hole in the budget. And that's the way they framed it. And the conversations I've had with the Liberals when I talk about this, they don't know that that's wrong. Like, I don't think they understand the link between taxes and productivity. They just think that this legacy idea that we're the party that's supposed to say tax cut occasionally. I don't really know why we say it, but we should say it again. Look, anyway, that's the first point. Don't overestimate what they understand. We really need to get the tax cuts equals productivity message through to the Liberal Party and a much bigger segment of the voting public. It's underappreciated. And while that's underappreciated, I don't think we'll ever sell tax cuts because people just see it as, well, you're just divvying up money. It's a handout, right? You can hand it out through more welfare or a tax cut. It's not just a handout. It changes incentives for the better or worse, depending on what you do. And if people don't understand that, we won't win the tax cutting argument. So anyway, that's the first point. The second point is, maybe I'm giving them too much credit with this one, is I get the impression they're very fixated on the macroeconomic issue of the fiscal balance, right? The budget balance. So they think tax cuts will blow a big hole in the budget, and you can't have that. They are scared to cut spending. As you can see, every time Labor says, I'll spend money, Liberals say, I'll spend it too, plus 10%, right? So it's just this big spendathon. And they'd be doing that for political reasons and maybe because they haven't thought about it too deeply. And then they just instinctively think we have to balance the budget because that's why we have our good reputation. In my opinion, the microeconomics is more important than the fiscal balance, right? The fiscal balance matters. They can't keep screwing that up forever. But if we don't fix our microeconomics, we're not going to see real growth. If we don't kickstart productivity, we're just going to be in a stagnant economy until someone kickstarts productivity. I think that's hugely important. They don't seem to understand or appreciate the importance of that. So they just say, well, we're too scared to cut spending and we need to balance the budget. And the easy way to do that is just rely on bracket creep, right? So provide no tax cuts and allow the automatic annual tax increase. We haven't touched on that. I'm sure you've spoken about that before with your audience, but every year there is a hidden tax increase of billions of dollars, right? That is not legislated. It's not debated. It's not discussed. It's not even admitted in the budget papers, but they just secretly raise our taxes by a couple of billion, a couple of thousand million, right? A billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. This is a serious tax increase. every year, and they know they've got that secret tax increase. This comes from inflation pushes your wages up into higher tax brackets, right? But if there's 10% inflation and you've got a 10% wage increase, you're not actually richer, right? You've got 10% more money, but everything you buy is 10% more.
Yeah.
So you're basically just treading water, and that's fine as far as it goes. But if you get that 10% nominal wage increase, your taxes go up because you're in a higher bracket. So you end up being poorer because of the tax system. And that's that secret tax increase. And again, the Australian Taxpayers Alliance has called on the government to end bracket creep. But it seems unlikely they're going to listen to us at this stage.
Both Liberal and Labor are completely complicit in being happy with having bracket creep continue.
Yeah, well, I think most voters are unaware of this secret tax increase we get each year. Liberal and Labor are very aware of it because they know that's the only way they balance a budget, right? They allow the spending to get out of control. They've got really no hint of even thinking about getting spending under control. And then they go, oh, but don't worry, we can just sit back and rake in these billions of dollars of tax increase every year. And if we rake in enough bracket creep, we'll be able to balance the budget. But that strategy for balancing the budget is let spending stay out of control and let taxes go out of control as well. And hopefully they can balance over the long run. Look, I think that's their Liberal Party strategy, just to hope for enough bracket creep to hopefully balance the budget someday. And then I think they expect to be seen as good economic managers if they do that, right? If they increase the size of government responsibly, then they're responsible economic managers, and they'll say, and Labor's going to increase the size of government irresponsibly. And to my mind, the fact that they're both just agreeing to increase the size of government is the big red flag that someone needs to get out in front of that and say that's the wrong direction. That's not something that should have bipartisan support. But anyway, I suspect they care more about the budget balance than they do about microeconomic reform.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrifying to think of all the way, like on top of inflation robbing us secretly by making the money that we have saved lower in value, they also rob us a second time just on inflation, not even talking about taxation yet, on the bracket creep, which then goes on top of the taxation they have. So, I mean, it's funny that you say they're so economically illiterate, except when it comes to things like bracket creep. Then they're very expert in what they're doing. It's scary. It's scary to think that the people who are running the show, and in fact all the mainstream establishment media and all the parties that get the major attention, they don't talk about this stuff. The stuff they talk about is so micro and it's so off to the side kind of side issues. It's scary to think that these are the people in charge. These are the people choosing our destiny, and we have to pretend that this veneer of respectability that they have is true. Is accurate, and it's not just like they're not just thieves. But
there's two things on that quickly.
Yep.
If I may. Sorry.
No, you go. You do it every time you have a rant. Please rant.
Very rude in your interview, but I just wanted to give a little shout out to, I mean, you've heard, I think it's palpable how disappointed I am with the Liberal Party in this election campaign. And that is very real. So I'll balance that with half a little compliment. At least Dutton did mention the words bracket creep and indexing the tax brackets, which is the traditional way that people would go about trying to fix bracket creep. So he mentioned that he would like to someday think about having a steering committee who would talk about the terms of reference to create a backbench committee to discuss how they might fix it before our grandchildren retire, which is all thoroughly underwhelming. But as I said before, with Labor's little tax cut, a small step in the right direction is at least a little step in the right direction. Putting the indexing of tax brackets on the political agenda, I appreciate. It's better that they do that than not do that. So I would like it for him to have come out and committed to indexing the tax brackets before the end of his term, or within 5 years, or give it a commitment. He didn't do that, but at least he mentioned it. So there's one small thing. I think there is pressure in the background by some of the thinking people and the Liberals to try and get that done. And I guess some of it bubbled through and accidentally hit the back of Dutton's brain somewhere. The other side of this is, you're right, it is underwhelming, the policy discussion. There's been basically no real economic reform in this country for 25 years now. And I'm not sure that the economic reform from 25 years ago was that great, but at least something was happening. The only legislation that you could even call real reform, microeconomic reform, productivity reform, are those stage 3 tax cuts. And a quick note about those, by the way, they were good. They were legitimately a good change. They compensated us for about 2 years of bracket creep. It took 6 years from the time they were announced to when they were introduced. It took 6 years to bring them in. They compensated us for 2 years of bracket creep, and yet Labor and the Greens and the ABC will tell us, oh, look, we've slashed taxes too much already. Look at this slashing of the tax. That narrative is wrong, but it's dangerous because a bunch of people think we've slashed taxes because they don't see this hidden tax increase. And the Liberals should get much better at explaining that if they ever wanted to actually achieve smaller government, which maybe it's I'm being a bit hopeful in thinking that's what they actually wanted to achieve. But yeah, anyway, rant over.
Yeah, I mean, look on their website. They say we are a small government party. We are for all the things that we know. They absolutely in act have not been doing it all. What I was going to ask was, okay, so we're in this period of stagnation for productivity, and we're also, I mean, everyone knows, right? Inflation ever since COVID has been rampant. I love that they always talk about inflation as if it is this thing that can't be helped. It comes from overseas, it comes from the trade routes, it comes from other countries, the markets, whatever. I don't know, Russia. Maybe it's got something to do with Russia and Ukraine. And it's this thing that the government is completely not involved in at all, despite the fact that, I mean, I'm sure you agree, the money printing that certainly happened before, but was exacerbated during COVID, has caused a lot of the heavy inflation that we're feeling at the moment. But what is the end game of this, right? Stagnation at the same time as inflation. Like, if we don't have some serious economic reform, like we clearly need, like, where are we heading?
Well, I mentioned before that I think we should reframe this cost of living discussion as being in stagnation, being in a recession, because I think that is the right way of framing it. I suspect, maybe going against the grain for someone who has Rothbard looking over his shoulder, I suspect we can get the inflation situation under control, but I think that's going to be very cold comfort when we do. Right? If we get inflation down, firstly, I think they should be targeting 0 instead of their 2 to 3% bracket. But, put that aside. 2% inflation, it's not great, but it doesn't destroy an economy. I think there is a chance they could get that under control, and no one's going to feel any better because we still won't have wages going up. We'll still be either stagnating or going backwards. And while that's true, everyone's still going to be feeling the pinch. So I don't think people are going to get much happier. But anyway, putting that aside, the inflation situation, there's a lot of debate about what causes it out there amongst the chatterati. Fundamentally, there's an accounting identity, the amount of money chasing the amount of goods. And inflation comes from if the amount of money goes up quicker than the amount of goods goes up. And this isn't really a theory. I guess it is a theory, but it's an accounting identity. It has to be true. The simplified example, if you got $10 and there's 10 apples to be bought, $10, 10 apples, each apple costs $1 each. If there's $20 chasing 10 apples, each apple will cost $2 each. It has to. What else could happen? And so there's two things then that can create inflation: too much money chasing the goods, or the amount of goods going down, right? And during COVID, we had both of those, right? So the government shut down the economy, so fewer goods to be bought, and then just interest rates went to 0. Official interest rates were 0.1, but rounding error, and there's a lot of money was pumped into the economy. So a lot more money chasing a lot fewer goods. It doesn't take a genius to work out what's going to happen with that. For all the people who were a big fan of all the COVID hysteria and the exaggerated response, if you are one of those people and you're currently complaining about inflation, where do you think it came from? Right? We printed too much money. We shut down the amount of goods you could buy. It was inevitable. We are now living with the inflation hangover from that binge we had under a Liberal government, but with full Labor support, right? So now, interest rates then did have to go back up. They went back up. Everyone complained about it, but it was the only responsible thing the RBA could do if they wanted to get inflation under control. Unfortunately, because they, in my opinion, left interest rates too low for too long, putting way too much money into the economy, and then they increased interest rates too tepidly and too slowly. Because of that, the inflation just lasted much longer than it had to and dragged out for longer in Australia than it did anywhere else in the world. But it is a solvable problem. So I have hope that as long as the Reserve Bank doesn't end up getting fully politicized by a Labor government that wants to just get them to push down interest rates for political purposes, I live in hope that that's a solvable problem And then I keep coming back to the issue is I'm not sure how the productivity question is solvable, because that requires either a serious tax cut, serious deregulation, and seriously fixed energy systems. And I can't see any political will to tackle those big issues. But yes, inflation is a problem, hopefully a fixable one.
Well, I mean, and we see sometimes we don't necessarily think. I mean, as an economist yourself, I'm sure you say like, everything is economics. It's the economy, stupid, right? But we don't necessarily always make the connection. Like, for example, the social issues that Labor chase and the Greens, obviously their main ones being like renewables to fix the climate emergency. That is tied in directly to the energy that we can produce because they're banning coal. They don't want to touch nuclear. They're lambasting Dutton for even suggesting nuclear, for example. And these also obviously are contributing to the fact that it's much more expensive and difficult to be productive. There's not really.
Well, yeah, they're just ruining the energy markets. And as I said before, I included them in one of the big three. I used to just say, cut tax and deregulate. I think it deserves to add that energy one, just to throw in people's face how dangerous it is that we've gone down this path of stupid energy policy in the name of trying to, challenge the sun to an arm wrestle to see who can control the temperature better. So yeah, I think that is seriously dangerous. The other thing about that is it is a hell of a lot of money the government's spending there, right? So they are really ramping up debt in a way that is unnecessary and puts us in a worse position. I don't want to be a Cassandra about this. Australia's government debt is currently manageable. I wish it was lower. It should be lower. It's been wasteful for it to be this high. But our current debt level is manageable. Just on debt, though, the point I always make about this is the current concern isn't the amount of debt we have. It's the trajectory that we're on. Right? So we keep racking up unnecessary debt in times of, no war, no big drama, no real reason to be in a recession other than bad economic policy.
Well,
and we just keep racking up this
Haven't
debt.
you heard of the climate emergency?
Yeah, everything's an emergency. I'm very aware of it. That's the standard MO of all non-libertarians. You take take any issue with a glimmer of, some hint of truth to it. You exaggerate it out of all proportion and use that as a justification for more money and power to politicians and bureaucrats. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Next election, next emergency. But that's a standard libertarian rant. It's very true. And some people see that in specific cases, like some people saw it with COVID and say, oh, look, they exaggerated COVID and got more money and power. What I hope those people who saw it with COVID understand is that's not COVID specific. That's just the government, right? They do that anywhere and everywhere. But on the point of the debt, so we've got deficits that we don't need to have that are far too high, but there's also a lot of money the government spends off budget. So most of their climate spending is actually done off budget, like billions and billions of dollars, announced every budget, announced every election to look really good, then don't impact the budget balance. So, they don't look too bad when the journalists look at the budget balance. Most journalists can't read the budget papers or understand what they're reading. So that this goes straight past them, all this off budget spending, and it racks up that debt. And as I said before, the current level of debt could be managed as long as we stopped going in the wrong direction. But the scary thing is that there's very little hint that either side of politics has any interest in stopping going in the wrong direction. So I liken this to, we're not at the cliff, right? But we're walking towards the cliff. We're going towards the cliff. And some people think that's fine, or we'll just stop before we get to the edge. The problem is nobody knows where the cliff edge is. There's no hard and fast rule. It's not that if you get government debt at 80% of GDP, then, the next minute you fall off the cliff. It might be 80%. It might not be. It might be 100%. It might be 120. Some countries are getting away with debt well over 100% of GDP, and their economy isn't imploding yet. We don't know where the cliff is. We know it exists. So it's really like we're walking towards a cliff edge blindfolded. And in that situation, yeah, sure, the next step might not take you off the edge, but what idiot keeps walking? There's a cliff in front of you, and you're blindfolded. And also, you can't just turn debt off on a dime. So to extend my analogy beyond the point that normal people would extend it, it's like we're walking towards a cliff blindfolded and drunk. The only responsible thing to do there is stop bloody walking that way. And it's not because, as I said before, I don't want to be a Cassandra. I don't want to exaggerate things. I want to be very honest about this because, I think we're right. So we have the ability to just be brutally honest and still win the debate. So the current debt isn't the problem. But but there's no reason for us to keep walking that direction. So, and you see no hint of either side appreciating that. And a lot of this climate stuff is really ramping up that debt in a way that we really don't need to do, because it's not even good policy on its own.
Can I try and extend your analogy even further? Let me give it a whirl. We're blindfolded, walking drunk towards the edge of a cliff. We don't know exactly where the edge of a cliff is, and half of our mind is arguing with the other half over whether we should be jogging or sprinting. Is that does that fit?
Well, they're being the two different political parties. Yes, that's the Liberal Party pitch. Is basically we'll take you to the same place Labor's going, but we'll just drive at the speed limit. It is remarkable the degree to which you can work out what Liberal Party policy is by just looking at whatever the left wanted 5 years ago.
Yep. Well, and yeah. Anyway, I could go on a whole tangent there, but I did want to ask you a couple more things while I've got you. So there is obviously this enormous problem that we have in not just the discourse, but in the debt and in all of what's happening with government, that the actual serious things that need to be cut or that need to go or that need to be changed, economic policy, for example, are not the ones being discussed at the debates. Like right now, when we have the attention, or when they have the attention of the whole country who's paying attention for these 2 weeks, who are actually, clued in because they have to make a decision, and some of them are trying to be as educated as they possibly can. They're watching the debates. The discussion is so mild, it's so removed from what the actual issues are. So what would be, in your mind, if we could bring some attention to some of the what are like the big things that need to be completely at the front of people's minds, that need to go, that the government needs to cut, that spending needs to stop for, that are not even in the public discourse?
Yeah, I couldn't help but kind of laugh to myself when you said people trying to be informed, so they were watching the debates. I don't think anyone got informed by watching the debates, especially the one this week. It was asinine and totally vacuous, empty of all real content, unfortunately. Unfortunately, that is kind of the nature of the political debate, as you mentioned. No one's discussing the big issues that are existential threats to this country going forward. And look, one reason for that is discussing it would probably lose them the election. And I understand that. Like there is the real politic here. The reality of politics is we give people incentives, whether tax rates being too high, bad incentives, bad behavior. Politicians also face incentives, right? So politicians who are too honest are often what's called ex-politicians, because they've just got voted out and replaced by the other politician that lied better. So the incentives are terrible. It's almost, I hesitate to say it because I don't want to get them off the hook, but it's almost not the politician's fault. It's the nature of the system. You replace all of these current politicians with 150, or was it 226 of the best people you know, and let the system play out for 5 years, we're still going to be in a bad place because of the incentives they face. Anyway, having given you the black pill, to directly answer your question, I say this not thinking that a major party could do this right now, but somebody needs to get this conversation going. Our health and welfare system is unsustainable. I'm not saying this as like, oh, I have a slightly different one that I prefer. I certainly do have a different one that I prefer, but just literally, it's unsustainable. Fertility rates are collapsing around the world, so we're going to having an aging population that's really going to be kicking in sharply in the coming decades. And we've got fewer and fewer taxpayers having to pay health and welfare expenses for more and more people. And it's just not going to add up, because to try and make that work, we're going to increase tax, but that's going to decrease productivity even more. More and more of those people are then shifting to the public sector, which aren't net taxpayers. So it's just an unsustainable Ponzi scheme. Now, it probably will last for a couple more decades, which means the political incentives, if you tell the truth about this, you're the baddie, right? Abbott very famously tried to take a little baby step in the right direction with his 2014 budget, and the Liberals have been massacred on that ever since. It's a political albatross around their neck that they're trying to run away from. And now both major parties, put their hands up and shriek, oh, we promise we will never do anything responsible. And Labor accuses the Liberals, I accuse you of potentially doing something responsible. And the Liberals say, no, we won't. I promise we won't be responsible. And that was the debate last night. And look, I understand health and welfare they're very touchy issues. No one wants to see them cut. But if it's unsustainable, there are two options, right? It will be cut. Either we could try and do it responsibly and carefully now, or we could wait till the system collapses and just watch it all implode in one hit. And if people understood that those were the options faced, I would hope with enough discussion, we might be able to convince a growing number of people that this path is unsustainable. Maybe we should take the responsible path early when it's all manageable. And there are manageable incremental reforms that could be done, right? You don't have to slash and burn sort of radical libertarian style on the first day. Maybe we should. But in terms of selling this to the major parties, there are softer ways of going in that direction. But we're never going to get to the end of that path if we don't even look at the path, right? I mean, they're not even taking a half little shuffle onto being serious about reforming health and welfare. They're just so scared of even mentioning it that it's just not on the agenda for anyone. And so that is a problem. And whoever raises it has to be the baddie. Thankfully, I've resigned myself to that role long ago. I can be one of the baddies. We're going to have to have the government responsible for less health and welfare. I mean, those things are growing at well over the rate of GDP, right? They're growing at 5 or 6% a year. The number of people paying tax isn't growing proportionally. I mean, the old stat, there used to be 2.5 working people. There used to be 5.5 working people for every person over 65. And they're the ones that take the vast majority of the health and welfare spending. Now we're down to 4 working people per aged person. And we're on trajectory to get it down to 2.5 working people. And of those 2.5 working people to pay for each aged person, not all of them are working productively in the private sector. So you're getting a really smaller and smaller sliver of people having to try and pay for that. And that's just as far as the projections go forward. The situation doesn't stop getting worse. It just keeps getting worse until someone either starts to get responsible or we just become accelerationists and just drive the economy off a cliff and see if we can rebuild French Revolution style afterwards, which I don't recommend.
Yeah. I mean, or we get to the point of what Argentina and Javier Milei, and suddenly the radical cutting option becomes somewhat palatable because it's gotten so bad.
Well, we'll see if they can cut there. I mean, he's still got a Congress preventing him from doing big cuts. So we'll see if they can. They were like briefly aware for one election that they had to do something. They're going to have to stay aware for 2 or 3 election cycles if they want anything to actually be done. I hope they can do it. I hope he can. He's a charismatic man, but I'll wait and see.
Yeah, the canary in the coal mine they are at the moment for where we could all be, unfortunately. Well, look, on that happy note, thank you so much for joining us. Please do continue being the bad guy. Your voice is very much needed. I would encourage anyone who's interested to follow you on everything. I'll put all your links down the bottom. The Australian Taxpayers Alliance app. I mean, all of this conversation was... much of it was similar to what you shared on your live stream recently. It's all good stuff. So I encourage anyone to go there. Thank you so much for your time, John. Any last words for our followers? Anything that you just want to touch on before we go?
Not really. Thank you for having me here. The last thing is, we desperately need lower taxes in this country. Get out there and tell every politician you can find that we need that. See, I was about to go on another rant just as you're saying goodbye, but look. We need to get the health and spending under control. We need to deregulate. We need to fix energy. All of that's true. But one of the things we needed to do was tax cuts. And that's actually politically easy. Everything else I suggest is politically hard. But going to an election saying, I want to cut your tax would get them votes. So this is the one simple, good step they could take in the right direction that's achievable in the near term. And so that's something we can still hope to incentivize the major parties to do. So if you, to the degree that you can, go out and pressure them, let them know that a Liberal Party without tax cuts is not a party that anyone's interested in. And hopefully we can move the dial on that.
Fantastic. So yes, mobilize, go forth and anti-tax. Go forth and productivity. All right. Thanks so much for your time. We will catch you